Georgia and Alabama meet for the 2021-22 national championship game, and not really a surprise. I think everybody expected these two teams to be here for the most part. There were some times where you thought Michigan and Cincinnati had a chance, but in the end, it was just not a good chance. We all knew that Alabama and Georgia were the two best teams in this playoff, and here they are for a rematch of the SEC championship game. Alabama didn't look like the team we saw in the SEC championship game. They looked like a much worse team, if you will. Now, there are things that they did really, really well, but offensively, they were largely shut down by Cincinnati. That's like the one thing through the passing, and I should say running the ball, no problem. They're going to need to put everything together because they're not going to be able to do the same thing against Georgia, but there are a lot of things that they did really well against Cincinnati. So even though it was not their best performance, this was still a dominant game for them. There's just some things they need to fine tune, and Georgia is going to be gunning for them. So we're going to take a look at the players you need to watch, like we usually do, the matchups you need to watch, and then the keys to the game. First one has to be Bryce Young. When you're talking to Alabama, you have to talk about the Heisman Trophy winner. Didn't have the best game against Cincinnati, passing at least. He was able to make some nice throws. He did make some key throws that were good, but overall, not his best game. And when you have a guy like Brian Robinson rushing for over 200 yards, that helps a lot. You don't need to make a ton of throws, but if you're going to do the same thing against Georgia, it's probably not going to go in your favor. So Bryce Young, player definitely you need to watch how he did against them in the first game. Over 400 yards, set an SEC championship record for passing yards in a game. That's going to be what they need. They're not going to need this 180 yards. And granted, Cincinnati's pass defense is better than Georgia's. I'm just going to say that here. So I think that the fact that they saw what they need to improve on is something that Nick Saban will use to their advantage, and Bryce Young will also use. Will Anderson is the next one. I think that you're going to have two heavyweights with him and Jamari Sailor going back and forth. Talk about that a little bit later, but Will Anderson didn't seem like he was dominating the game. I think Cincinnati did a really good job of trying to keep him out of the backfield, keep him off of Desmond Ridder. Unfortunately for Cincinnati, Alabama was just too good up front. They were able to send other guys to get to Desmond Ridder to stop the run game, that kind of stuff. So Will Anderson still made a few plays that were really, really good. I don't think he was as dominant as everyone thought, just because Cincinnati was trying to basically keep him out of the backfield. I don't think Georgia's going to have that luxury. I don't think that they're going to be able to do that. And I think that Will Anderson is going to have to play a big role. Finally, Christian Harris doesn't get talked about that much. We've talked about Will Anderson because he's listed as linebacker. Christian Harris hasn't really gotten a ton of attention this year. Now, I know that draft analysts and scouts have been looking at him for a while. If you're a college football fan, you know Christian Harris' name. It's just that on the team that he's on, people have really been talking about other guys, whether that's Will Anderson dominating or the struggles in the secondary. So it's almost like he's solid, but it doesn't mean that anybody's going to be talking about him that much. But Christian Harris plays a big role in this defense, and he's going to play a big role in slowing down that Georgia offense. Matchups that you have to watch. First one is the defensive line of Alabama versus Georgia's offensive line. That one's the first one you have to watch. Now, we'll include Will Anderson in that. Really, the front seven is almost kind of like who you want to watch, but the Will Anderson going against Jamari Sailor, that's a big matchup that you'll want to watch. I think when you're looking at what Fedarian Mathis was able to do against Cincinnati, he has to have a similar impact in this game if they're going to want to win the national championship. I think the defense is the big X factor for Alabama. Like I said, last week they won 27-6. There wasn't really ever any doubt that they were going to win, but at the same time, they didn't really pull away. And this defense was dominant up front. That really masked some concerns on the backside of the defense. So what can this defensive line do against a solid Georgia offensive line? Georgia's offensive line is much better than Cincinnati's. So can they be as effective? Can they be as explosive against a better team, a better unit? Next, Jamison Williams has to be more involved. He going against Darian Kendrick is going to be a matchup that NFL teams will want to watch. They're going to scour through that and find anything that they can. That is a matchup that I think has a big impact on this game. Jameson Williams is super explosive. Coming into the playoff, he's averaging over 21 yards per catch, which is insane. Those are crazy explosive numbers. That's a matchup that you're going to either watch because Georgia is going to try to take away Jameson Williams and let other guys beat them, which is kind of what Cincinnati did, or they're just going to leave him one-on-one with Darian Kendrick. And you saw against Michigan, Kendrick wasn't exactly dominant. Yeah, he had 2 interceptions, but he also got burned a few times too. So I think that Alabama is going to try to figure out a way, just like they did in the SEC championship game, to get Jameson Williams open and let him do his work in the secondary. Last one, the linebackers of Alabama have a huge matchup against Brock Bowers. Now, in the SEC championship, they held everybody in check except for Brock Bowers. Now, it didn't really matter that they couldn't really cover him because Alabama won by a lot, but they're still going to have to cover him because, as you saw, he is a nightmare to cover. And guys like we mentioned Christian Harris before. Christian Harris, I think, is the perfect matchup for Brock Bowers because he is athletic enough to cover downfield, but also physical enough where he can handle Bowers and his physicality. But Bowers is a unique talent. He's only a freshman, which is crazy. But I think that if he can lock down Bowers or at least limit him, maybe that Georgia offense slows things down. I know we saw more of explosive offense from Georgia last week, but can Alabama slow that down? Kind of starts with slowing down the running game, but then slowing down Brock Bowers as well. Keys to the game for Alabama. We just talked about this. You have to shut down Brock Bowers because even if Georgia is running the football well, throwing the ball hasn't really been their strong suit. Now they do have guys that can make you pay, and that's Brock Bowers. You have George Pickens, you have Jermaine Burton, you have lots of guys that can make an impact, but Brock Bowers has been the consistent passing threat for Georgia. So shutting him down is going to do a lot of good things for Alabama, and keeping him ineffective down the seam, finding ways to get bodies on him somehow. I think Christian Harris, like I said, is the perfect matchup. He's that great blend of athleticism and power where he can handle what Bowers brings to the table. Number 2, if I'm Alabama, this sounds weird, but make Stetson Bennett beat you. I know that your secondary is banged up. I know that that's a concern. However, you're not just asking the secondary to beat him. You can send pressure. You saw what happened to Desmond Ridder. Desmond Ridder was basically a non-factor. He did nothing against Alabama. And it wasn't because that, I should say, that included a secondary that was not very good. There were times where Cincinnati burned Alabama's secondary. They made them look really bad. And Georgia can do that too. However, one thing that helps negate that is sending pressure. One thing that Alabama did really well, Cincinnati did this really well too, is they mixed up looks a lot. And that confuses offensive lines quite a bit. So if Stetson Bennett doesn't have time to throw, then he's going to maybe make some poor decisions and turn the ball over. That's also how you mask any concerns on the secondary. Now, there were some good plays by this Alabama secondary. There's still some good players. If Armour Davis is able to go, if he is, I don't think he's going to be full strength, but if that hip is still hurting him, that's a huge loss. But if he's good to go, then it's going to be interesting to see what this secondary looks like. Picking up the pace is going to be the key that they'll probably be talking about all week. Now, it was a slow pace for Alabama against Cincinnati, mostly because they just wanted to run the ball. Now, Bill O'Brien got impatient at times and started throwing when he didn't need to. When you have a guy averaging 7 yards a carry like Brian Robinson, nearly 8 like Brian Robinson did, why are you throwing the ball? You have no need to throw the ball. And now you're going to have to throw the ball in this game, but you have to be able to pick up the pace. I think that Georgia is not built to play in a track meet. And we saw that in the SEC championship game when Alabama was able to jump out to that early lead and get explosive plays. And even though last week against Michigan, they did make some of those explosive plays, I don't think that they can handle the talent or keep pace with the talent of Alabama. This is going to be a really exciting matchup. 2 great teams going at it. Alabama is obviously the 1 seed for a reason, and you saw that they can win by scoring a bunch of points. They can also win by dominating in the trenches. Can they do that again? It feels like Georgia is coming on strong. So there's a lot of pressure on Alabama to pick up the pace and pick things up, fix their mistakes from the Cincinnati game. If they're able to get that passing attack going, Brian Robinson's going to be just fine, even against that great front seven for Georgia. That's a good group, but I think that Alabama can compete with that. And if they're able to open the passing game up, that's going to open things up for Robinson as well. It's Nick Saban. You really just betting against Nick Saban is not ever a good decision. I'm not saying I'm picking Alabama to win, but I think that Alabama is still in very good hands. Even though they struggled last week, they still showed dominance. They're still able to make some adjustments, and they're still able to win a national championship. They've been here before. And even though they have some new guys running the show, they still know what it takes to win the whole thing.